welcome to Sci-Fi Night. I'm your host, Sebastian Manuel Martinez, and this is the show where we take a look at some of the lesser-known sci-fi and horror movies out there and try to find the right expectations needed to get the most out of them. So, what's the most important part of a horror movie? Suspense, tension, scares? Well, tonight's movie has none of those, basically. Unrest is a 2006 horror film from the otherwise promising director Jason Todd Ibsen. Unfortunately, this film is neither promising nor horror. Hardly anyway. The film stars a rather attractive Corey English as a medical student who I can assume was only cast because of her looks to distract from the plot holes. When a mysterious cadaver shows up, students start showing up dead, leading our protagonist to believe that the spirit of a corpse has something to do with it. So let's get this out of the way. This movie isn't scary. There's no tension, there's no scares, there's no threat, there's no blood, there's no gore, and there's no more nudity than you'd see in your average children's commercial, which in today's over-sexualized society is still on a PG-13 level. However, I do feel I must give credit where credit is due, because despite some glaring flaws, this movie is pretty nicely shot and directed. I can see why there's some hype around this director, and a lot of the scenes at least look nice, and the atmosphere in the first half is actually pretty decent. The acting is acceptable for a film of this level, but bad acting would at least have made the film a lot more entertaining. As it stands, the film lacks anything that reels you in. The biggest problem with a so-called horror movie is that it isn't scary, and it takes itself too seriously, so it's just kind of boring. The characters are generic and bland, so we don't care about them, and we never actually see anyone die, so nothing's really scary at all. Sure, people end up dead, but there are no actual death scenes in this movie. Isn't that insane? Yeah, everything happens off-screen. And now, in all fairness, I don't think that blood and gore necessarily make a film scarier or better, but this film just needs anything to happen. Let me explain how the kills in this film work. A character or characters hear a spooky sound or feel some kind of presence. They and the camera get close, and the scene cuts. Then we later find the character dead. Not really that suspenseful, is it? On top of that, there's just so much that doesn't add up, like why these medical students, who are clearly medical students, are referred to as doctors.
Dr. Blanchard? Dr. Blanchard? It's Dr. Blanchard. Dr. Blanchard?
When that's what we're in the process of trying to become. Wet clothing shows up in the next scene in tip-top shape, and characters unexplainably get a hold of security tapes from Brazil. I could say that this movie has more holes than a Swiss cheese, but I'd rather say that it has more holes than the guy that gets all shot up by the ED-209 in RoboCop. A film like this would benefit immensely from some gore, simply because the atmosphere and tension isn't really there. But you're not really going to find any blood if it wasn't already smeared on a wall before the scene started. The film's big gimmick is that they use real dead bodies as some of the cadavers, but I don't know if that's something to boast about. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'd be pretty pissed off if I saw one of my dead relatives starring in this piece of shit. All in all, this whole movie just feels like a misfire. It takes itself way too seriously for any of this toned-down non-horror to be interesting. The characters are way too bland to care about, and you never once see a kill or a ghost. Not once. That's right. In this ghost horror movie, you don't actually see a ghost.
What the fuck is this?
And I'm sorry if I classify as spoilers, but I feel like this is more of a warning. If the characters of a story were more interesting, then this toned-down bloodless theme could work. But unfortunately, that's just where it doesn't really come together. So, what should you expect from this movie? Nice shots. Really, the only good thing about this film is that it's at least competently directed and shot. The only other positive trait, which gets brought up in reviews on IMDb, is the fact that Corey English is attractive, which is something to be attributed to herself and not the actual film. Even the directing at times is a bit shoddy though, as you sometimes wonder why you opted for some pointless handheld shots. Overall though, the look of the film is really the only positive aspect. No horror. Yeah, this quote-unquote horror film is like an activity book where someone has already solved the activities. You're left with something that just doesn't fulfill its use. The atmosphere for some of the scenes are pretty okay, But after a while, it just starts feeling really stale, and you're begging for some kind of excitement. Anything, really. Disappointment. Popping in a film whose front cover clearly shows a dead body rising from a hospital morgue gives off certain expectations. You know, expectations of seeing some kind of zombie creature or ghost or something scary at least. Unfortunately, these expectations are not really met at all. Aside from decent ambience, it really just falls flat since there aren't any scares or content to match this mood. So I can't actually really recommend this movie to anyone except to show them how not to make a horror movie. But it really is kind of a shame because you do see glimpses of potential and there is definitely talent involved. It just didn't come together. If you think that potential is enough to make a film bearable, then by all means check it out. Or if you're some kind of weirdo who wants to see actual dead bodies on screen, then go for that. But when all these serious tones and performances are matched with such lackluster payoffs and resolution, it just seems even more lame than it would if a film had been a cheesy B-fest of bad acting, nudity, and gore. As it stands though, this movie is mostly just boring. There are glimpses of goodness in it, but it's not enough to make a whole movie experience worth it. So that about does it for this episode of Sci-Fi Night. We hope you enjoyed it. I'm your host, Sebastian Metal Martinez, and have you guys seen Unrest? What do you think of it? And what do you think of them using actual dead bodies in the movie? Do you think that's okay? Let us know in the comments below. While you're down there, you might as well click the like and subscribe button to help the show out and stay updated with it. And we look forward to seeing you guys in the next episode of Sci-Fi Night.